Hello, I'm Landon Schlungen, and today we're going to go through the CSS tutorial on W3schools. Bunch of documentation. If you like to just listen to code like it's a podcast, this would be a good one to do that on because CSS or W3schools is very thorough in its documentation. And we have a lot of stuff to get through in the CSS tutorial, starting from home. We have to go through all the basic stuff, then advanced, then responsive, then CSS Grid, CSS Sass, CSS examples, and references. And we'll see how far we get. Maybe I won't do the references, but let's go. Let's try it out. All right. CSS tutorial. CSS is a language we use to style an HTML document. It describes how HTML elements should be displayed. This tutorial will teach you CSS from basic to advanced. So we can either start learning CSS now with this. I actually wonder what that does. Oh, it just brings us to introduction. So sweet. CSS stands for Cascading Style Sheets. CSS describes how HTML elements are to be displayed on screen, paper, or in other media. CSS saves a lot of work. It can control the layout of multiple web pages all at once. External style sheets are stored in CSS files. CSS demo, one HTML page, multiple styles. So here we just have this page, but we have different style sheets and it can display different styles on it. So that's a cool one. No style sheet, it's just a basic HTML document, but when we click on the buttons, then it changes it. So that's what CSS does, gives it structure, gives it style, gives it different colors, stuff like that. Why use CSS? It's used to define styles for your web pages, including design, layout, and variations, and display for different devices and screen sizes. Yeah, so imagine if we had to see this for all websites everywhere, no matter what. That would be horrible. Thank goodness we have CSS. CSS solved a big problem. HTML was never intended to contain tags for formatting a web page. HTML was created to describe the content of a web page like that. When tags like font and color attributes were added to the HTML 3.2 specification, it started a nightmare for web developers. Development of large websites where fonts and color information were added to every single page became a long and expensive process. To solve this problem, the worldwide consortium created CSS. CSS removed the style formatting from the HTML page. Nice. And it saves a lot of work. With an external style sheet file, you can change the look of an entire website by just one file. CSS syntax. So here we have our property and then our value, and then they're separated with a semicolon and then property and value and surrounded by curly braces. And then at the beginning is the selector, so we select all of our H1s and we give it a color of blue and a font size of 12. So here's an example. In this example, all P elements will be center aligned with a red text color. You try that and there we go, that's what we have. We can also center it left, and then it will be on the left side. There's a bunch of different values for different properties. And I explain the example. Let's go on. CSS selectors are used to find or select the HTML elements you want to style. We can divide CSS selectors into 5 categories. Simple selectors select elements based on name, ID, class. Combinator selectors select elements based on a specific relationship between them. Pseudo-class selectors select elements based on a certain state. Pseudo-element selectors select and style a part of an element. Attribute selectors select elements based on an attribute or attribute value. So here's the element selector. Here we select all the P elements. CSS ID selector is done with a hashtag. This is where if you have a HTML element with an ID on it, then we can select it with hashtag that ID and put in some styles. An ID name cannot start with a number. Good to note. CSS class selector, those ones start with a dot. So if anything has class center, then we can go, or only P elements with class center, you can do P dot center, and then only the paragraphs with the center class will have this style applied to them. We can do multiple classes on a single P tag with just a space in between them. The CSS universal selector is the asterisk, and this will apply to every single element on the page. So a lot of things that we like to do on this sometimes is just add margin of 0 and padding of 0 so that we're starting at a fresh base and they don't take the default styles from the p tags and heading tags. We can actually just put that in here ourselves. But if you like to have defaults, then you can get rid of that. CSS grouping selector selects all HTML elements with the same style definitions. H1, H2, and P elements have the same style definitions. It would be better to group the selectors to minimize the code. So right here, we just put commas in between them, and this code is equal to this code. There we go. And we can test ourselves with an exercise. Set the color of all P elements to red. You just go P and then color red. Awesome. Next. 3 ways to insert CSS. We have external CSS, internal CSS, and inline CSS. External CSS is done with this link rel style sheet. I'll actually show you how to do this. If you have VS Code, you can open that. Or, I don't even know. You can just use your Finder in a text editor, but the one on Mac isn't very good, so just warning you. You should probably use this, which is VS Code. So here's my HTML document. For some reason it's not text highlighting. I'm not really sure why. But I'll make a styles.css file, and then I'll link to it with link. And it already knows, and I can do // and it pops up right there, style.css, and save that. Geez, why is that not formatting? Reload. This thing is awful. Geez, reload. It's not reloading. Let me try redoing this. Quit. Open that back up. Hey, there we go. We get some nice styling on that. Some good highlighting. And then we can add some styles to this. So we can say like H1, we want to make the font size abnormally large, like 100 pixels. And we can save that, and then we can run this HTML file. Open with live server, and there we go. There's our abnormally large text. So that's how you use VS Code and link to style sheets. That's what they mean by this. External style sheet can be written in any text editor and must be saved with the .css extension. The external .css file should not contain any HTML tags. Here's how my style.css file looks, and just like that, no tags. Internal CSS. Another way to do it is having style tags and then putting your CSS inside of those style tags. So I can show that right here. Again, I think we put it in the head. Yeah, put them in the head. That's a fine place for them. So we go style, and we can just go P, and let's make paragraph green color. So we'll go color of green, and save that, and then it should update. Yeah, there we go. What is up, everybody? It's green text. Nice. All right, inline CSS. This is done with a style attribute on your tags. We use this sometimes. And let's try that on this p tag. We'll try style of color blue and see what happens. And I have to rerun this because I closed it for some reason. And there we go. Now it's blue. So the inline styles take precedence over the selecting styles like this. So that's a good thing to note. But I think if it was a class, let's try class equals para. If it's a class, then I think the class takes precedence. .para. Let's save that, and it's still blue. Okay, so I guess inline styles still take precedence. That's good to know. Or maybe it's just the one that shows up first. Try that. Okay, yeah. Inline styles take precedence. Nice. Good thing to know. Multiple style sheets. If some properties have been defined for the same selector in different style sheets, the value from the last red style sheet will be used. So if we have two style sheets on here, like two links, style and styles, then the second one will take precedence over the first one. Good to know. If the internal style is defined after the link to the style sheet, the H1 element will be orange. Okay, so I'm guessing if this is above, then the other style sheet will take precedence. Yeah, okay. Cascading order. What style will be used when there is more than one style specified for an HTML element? All the styles in a page will cascade into a new virtual style sheet by the following rules, where number 1 has the highest priority. 1, inline style, highest priority. I just showed that. External and internal style sheets, and then browser default. Makes sense. All right, let's move on. CSS comments, that's done with /* and then asterisk / at the end. You can add comments wherever you want in the code. Comments can also span multiple lines. There's a multi-line comment, HTML and CSS comments. So HTML comments are with the like arrows, and CSS comments are with the /*. Next, CSS colors. So I did this in the HTML portion as well, but this is they're CSS. We can just have names for colors like this. Easy to remember, easy to use, but they're not like specific colors that you can choose. You can't choose, you know, an infinite amount of colors if you do it this way. But you can basically choose an infinite amount of colors with RGB and hex and HSL. So RGB, you have red, green, blue. Here we have the full value for red, slight value for green, and a slight value for blue, and that's why it's kind of tomato-ish color, because red is most of that. And then with hex, it's kind of the same thing. The 2 F's here are red, the 6-3 here are green, and the 4-7 here are blue. And it goes from 0 to F, so there's 16 characters or numbers there. Instead of going from 0 to 10, it goes from 0 to F. For some reason, I don't know. That's just the way they wanted to do that. HSL goes in a color wheel. Let's actually move on. So yeah, here's red, green, blue. Hex is the same thing. If we change it to green, so this is a combination of green and red basically, which makes yellow. And if we do a combination of all three, then it's white. If we do a combination of red, blue, it's purple. If we do a combination of blue and green, it will probably be blue and green. What color does that make? I don't know. Oh, cyan. Nice. It's not really a primary color. If this was yellow and blue, then it would be green. It's not a primary color. Oh, man. And that's just the way they do it. All right. HSL. Oh, also, that's a good thing to note. 3-digit hex values. You can do 3 digits like this, FC9. It's the same as 2 Fs, 2 Cs, and 2 9s. So that's a shorthand way of writing colors. It's pretty cool. HSL, so here's hue, saturation, and lightness. Hue goes around in a color wheel, so if I do this, it'll slowly change from red to yellow to green to cyan to blue to purple and back to red. So is that basically a rainbow? I think so. It's basically a rainbow. All right, and then lightness and saturation for that. And I think HSL is like a color picker. It's actually very similar to it. A lot of people prefer HSL values. All right, CSS backgrounds. The CSS background properties are used to add background effects to elements. In these chapters, you will learn about the following CSS background properties: background color, image repeat, attachment, position, and then just background, which is a shorthand property. Background color, we can make the body, a background color of light blue. Other elements, so H1 we can give a background color div, paragraph we can give background colors, opacity, transparency. So here we can set opacity to 0.3. You could also do a background color. Instead of setting opacity, I suppose if they have it like this, then it's kind of hard to show, but transparency using RGBA. So yeah, the A value is the opacity, and here we're setting opacity to 30%. And that would show up like this. Awesome. Background image. Here we have a URL to paper.gif, so then that's our background image on the background. Very cool. Shows a bad combination of text and background image. This text is hardly readable. Yeah, got to be careful with that. Make sure it's high contrast. Make sure your text can be read. And you can set it for specific elements as well, like p tags or divs or whatever. Background repeat. So we can do background repeat X. Okay, so is that just a gradient? Not really sure what repeat X does. Does it explain it? The background will look better. If the image above is repeated only horizontally, the background will look better. Oh, okay. Interesting. So without it, it's like this. Ah, okay. But then it doesn't repeat to the Y. Okay. Background repeat, no repeat is like this. It will just be a single thing. If it is set to repeat, then it will cover the whole thing. Okay. CSS background position, we can set a position on it, right top. So then it will be over there. That's cool. Next, background attachment. Property specifies whether background image should scroll or be fixed. Okay, so if we can scroll on this, then it's fixed there. That's cool. We can also set it to scroll with the rest of the page. Yeah, okay. I'm guessing that's default. Background shorthand. Here you can do a bunch of these all at once. Use the shorthand property to set the background properties in one declaration. So first is background color, then the image, then repeat, and then position. All right. I'm surprised they didn't do the cover background size one on this either. Maybe that's a separate one. That's probably why it wasn't working in my HTML tutorial. Alright, so there's that. Set the background color of the H1 element to light blue. Just do background color. Easy. Alright, next. CSS borders. CSS border properties allow you to specify style, width, and color of an element's border. And that's done with border style. You can do dotted, dash, solid, double grooved, ridge, inset, outset, none hidden. And that's what they all look like. Normally it's going to be a solid border. Just saying. Next, border width. Here you can set the border width. Pretty self-explanatory. Specific side width. So here you can do 5 pixels on the top and bottom, 20 pixels on the sides. Right here it goes from right, then it goes right, then top, then right, or no, left. Yeah, or no, top. Top is first. 25 pixels on top, 10 pixels right. So it goes top, right, bottom, left. So top, right, bottom, left here. And it kind of goes in a circle that way. And let's go. Background color, or border color. Border color. Hex, specify a hex value. Kind of the same thing as background color, except you set the color of the border. Easy, easy. Border sides, we have dotted, solid. You can set it to different sides. So maybe you want the top style of the border to be dotted and you want the right and the left to be solid. You can do that, I guess. Never really used that before, but hey, it's there if you need it. Next, border shorthand. So this is just with the border property. Let's actually do this in VS Code. Let's try it. So let's set a paragraph to have border of solid 2 pixels of gray. Sure. Save that. Let's see what it looks like. And there we go. There's our 2 pixels of solid border. And it kind of outlines the element. So here we know that this p tag is taking up this whole line screen. So that's good to know. You can also specify all the individual border properties for just one side. So border left, we can do 6 pixel solid red, and it will be like that. That's actually kind of neat. Sometimes that will look nice. Border bottom, you can basically underline it. Next, rounded borders. So here we add border radius, and then it will give a rounded border. A lot of times we like to do this on buttons to make them circular. So let's say I have a button here, button dot btn, and we'll say my button, and we'll select this button with dot button btn, and we'll give it a border radius of 10 pixels, and we'll also give it a padding of 10 pixels, and we'll give it a background color of what goes good with black, orange maybe. And then let's see what that looks like. And there's my button. Beautiful. So there we have rounded edges, and it looks kind of nice. More examples right here. Test yourself with exercises. Use the border shorthand property to set a 4 pixel dotted red border for the P elements. You can just do border here, and then 4 pixels solid red. Easy. All right, next. Margins. Margins are used to create space around elements outside of any defined borders. This element has a margin of 70 because there's 70 pixels around this element. They didn't really show it very well with that example. Individual size, margin top, right, bottom, left. You can also do shorthand with just margin and then doing top, then right, then bottom, then left. It goes in a circle, same thing as the border. So let's see what this looks like. So here this is kind of off to edge a little bit. Let's give it a big margin on the top so you kind of know where that is. Run it, so then now all this margin is up here, and it pushed the whole thing down. All right. Use the margin shorthand with two values, so then it goes Y, so 25 pixels on the top and bottom, and then 50 pixels on the x-axis. And then if you just have one value, then it's 25 pixels all the way around. A lot of times it'll just do one value like so. And that's same with padding, how I did it with the button. The auto value, margin auto will center it. So you can, to horizontally center the element within its container, just do margin auto. The element will then take up the specified width, and the remaining space will be split equally between left and right margins. Nice. The inherit value, margin inherit. This example lets the left margin of the P class x1 element be inherited from the parent class div. So I'm guessing it will have 100 pixels as its margin. Yes, so there's this div with a margin left of 100, and then this P tag inherits that. Okay. I don't really use that, but it's there. Margin collapse. Top and bottom margins of elements are sometimes collapsed into a single margin that is equal to the largest of the two margins. This does not happen on left and right margins, only top and bottom margins. Look at the following example. Margin collapse. All right. In this example, the H1 element has a bottom margin of 50 pixels, and the H2 element has a top margin of 20 pixels. So the vertical margin between H1 and H2 should have been 70 pixels. However, due to margin collapse, the actual margin ends up being 50 pixels. Huh. Interesting. Actually, I did not know that. It's kind of cool. I wish it wouldn't collapse though. It's really annoying. So I guess if you're using margin on two elements, make sure it's just on one of them so you don't get confused like that. All right, let's go on. CSS padding. Padding is used to create space around an element's content inside of any defined border. So here's our border, and then it has a padding of 70 pixels. Did that on my button. I can add more padding to it if I'd like to. Let's make it padding a 20 pixels and see what that looks like. And boom, it's basically a bigger button now. Awesome. It's basically the same thing as margin. You have padding top, right, bottom, left, except it's inside the border. And there's also the shorthand property, which is top, then right, then bottom, then left. And then you can also do it with three values. That would be, I guess, top, right, and bottom. Top, right, and top, and then right and left are 50 pixels, and then the bottom is 75. Okay, so that's cool. Let's try that with my button. Let's do that with padding, 20 pixels on top. We'll go 75 pixels on the sides, and we'll go 0 pixels on the bottom. See what that looks like. Oh yeah, it's so pretty. Oh man. And then you can also do it with 2 like that, and that will be top and bottom, and then on the x-axis. So let's try that as well quick here. So 20 pixels on the top and bottom, 75 pixels on the x-axis, which is on the right and left. And there it is. Looks good. Fairly good. And then also just 1, which is all around. And then we have examples. Margin and padding is probably one of the most important concepts to wrap your mind around with CSS because it just matters so much and you use it a lot. Height and width. CSS height and width properties are used to set in the height and the width of an element. CSS max width property is used to set the maximum width of an element. CSS height and width attributes, you can do auto, length, percentage, initial, inherit. So here we have a height of 200 pixels, width of 50%. So width of 50%, there it shrinks because we're making the screen size smaller and bigger, but the height won't change if we make the height smaller. It'll always be 200 pixels. It's static. Set the height and width of another div element, like so. Max width, so it won't exceed that width of 500 pixels, but it can go lower like that and collapse. So that's good to know. Max width, I think, is a lot more useful than just setting a width. And same with max height. Actually, height's probably not as important. Okay, let's go box model. So here's our box model. If you check and inspect on a page, then they add box models to these things. And a lot of browsers have it where you can inspect an element and see its box model, but my face is in the way, so let's not go there. Here it is. The margin is on the outside, then the border, then the padding is on the inside, and then content is inside the padding. So the content in the case of my button is the text right here, and then the padding is around the text, and then the border around that, and then the margin around that. Not really, I didn't really set any margin on that button, but whatever. Content, padding, border, margin. Yes. Box model allows us to add a border around elements and to define space between elements. Width and height of an element. Yep. I wonder what happens if we set a width and a height on my button here. Set a width of 200 pixels, a height of 80 pixels. See what that looks like. All right, so definitely got taller. Here's the calculation. 320 pixels width, plus 10 pixels left and right border, plus 20 pixels left and right padding equals 350. So it just adds on to it. All right, it's good to know. Has a total width of 350 even though you set the width to 320. So that must be the content. Width and height set the content. Yeah, the content area. Okay. That's important to know. CSS outline. An outline is a line drawn outside the element's border. This element has a black border and a green outline with a width of 10 pixels. So there's also an outline outside the border. So it goes border, outline, then margin. You don't really use outline too much. I think the only reason is for like tabbing through things. Outline style property specifies the style of the outline. Have one of the following values: dotted dash, solid, double groove, ridge. Same thing as border. All right, good to know. Outline width property specifies the width of the outline. Let's see what this looks like here. Okay, not super awesome. Next. Outline color, you can also set colors on it. Outline shorthand, you can do it in one thing. Thick ridge pink, 5 pixels solid yellow. So I guess thick is also like setting pixels. Outline offset, 15 pixel offset. 15 pixels outside the border edge. Okay, never used that before. Next, CSS text. Has a lot of properties for formatting text. The color properties you set the color of text, so we did that before. Text color and background color. This color is the actual text of the color, or color of the text. Background color is the like highlighting of it. The background color. Explanatory. Next, text alignment. You can do text line center, left, right. Text line justify. Each line is stretched so that every line has equal width and the left and right margins are straight, like in magazines and newspapers. All right. Text line last specifies how to align the last line of a text. Let's see what that looks like. So the last line, we can set it to the right, we can set it to center, and justify. Okay. Oh yeah, justify, I see, so it takes up the full space. Yep, makes sense. Text direction, die override, you can do right to left, you can do vertical alignment, baseline, text top, text bottom, sub, super. All right, cool. Never really used those before. Text decoration, so you can add underline, overline, line through. Sometimes you'll do text decoration underline for links and stuff. Specify color for the decoration line. You can do red, blue, green, whatever you want with text decoration color. Specify style for the decoration line. You can do text decoration style of solid, double, dotted. I'm guessing there's a shorthand. You can just do text decoration. Also with thickness, auto 5 pixels. Shorthand property is just text decoration. And you can go underlined, red, double, 5 pixels. Awesome. Small tip, all links in HTML are underlined by default. Sometimes you see that links are styled with no underline. The text decoration none is used to remove the underline from links like this. And sometimes you actually do use that. Especially for like these links up here. See how there's no underline for these? These are links. So they got rid of the underline on those by default by using text decoration none. So they're using it on this website for sure. Text transformation. Text transform property is used to specify uppercase and lowercase letters in a text. You can do text transform, uppercase, lowercase, or just capitalize. That's cool. Text spacing. You can do text indent of 50 pixels. You can do letter spacing. Sometimes you'll want to add letter spacing just to make it easier to read. Line height for sure. You want to add some of that if you're making a blog. Word spacing. You'll probably add, actually, word spacing. Yeah, you might add word spacing. Isn't that the same as letter spacing? Oh, letter spacing is different. That's spacing between letters. Word spacing is probably more important than letter spacing. White space, no wrap. So this will not wrap. See, there's a bunch of, it's just scrollable. Cool. Probably wouldn't use that much. Text shadow. Here we can add a text shadow to it, so it looks so hip and cool, guys. Add a red text shadow. Ooh, that's looking fancy. You can add some blur to it. Ooh, now it looks like a neon sign. More text shadow examples. I think this was actually pretty popular way back when, but since has fallen out of popularity. I don't see really any websites using this effect. You can use them on like boxes and stuff or buttons, but I would not use them on text. Text is just weird. Okay, CSS fonts. Font selection is important. Choosing the right font has a huge impact on how the readers experience a website. The right font can create a strong identity for your brand. Using a font that is easy to read is important. The font adds value to your text. It is also important to choose the correct color and text size for the font. Yes, font is very important. Difference between serif and sans serif fonts. So sans serif is like this. Serif has the extra little doohickeys on it. Some font examples: Times New Roman, Georgia, Arial, Verdana, Helvetica, Courier New. You know, I'm a big fan of Arial. All right, CSS, I think that's actually default for websites. Maybe. Let's actually try setting, oh no, for sure not. This is not Arial. Let's try setting that to Arial, see what it looks like. So inside of here, we'll go font family, Arial. So the first one takes precedence. If that's not available, then it chooses one of these. And there's Arial for you without the lines on them, where the little shelves. Yeah, shelves. CSS font family property, that's how you set it. Hey, that's the one I chose. Beautiful. It should hold several font names as a fallback system. Yes, so if Arial fails, then it will choose Helvetica. If Helvetica fails, then it'll choose sans serif. I'm guessing that's only a problem with very like verbose font families. Font web safe. Here there are 3 font types: Tahoma, Verdana, and sans serif. The second and third fonts are backups in case the first one is not found. So is Tahoma found? I'm guessing this one's not found, Taha, so it changes to Verdana. So that's why we do that. Best web safe fonts for HTML and CSS: Arials, Verdana, Helvetica, Tahoma, all these. Arial. Arial is the most widely used font for both online and printed media. Arial is also the default font in Google Docs. It's one of the safest web fonts and is available in all major operating systems. Verdana is a very popular font, easily readable, even small font sizes. Helvetica, font loved by designers, suitable for many types of businesses. Tahoma, font has less space between the characters. Trebuchet MS was designed by Microsoft. Use this font carefully. Not supported by all mobile operating systems. Times New Roman, that one's good. Georgia's good. Garamond is classical font used for many printed books. Courier New, monospace. Monospace, that does not look very good, but it is, I think, used for like code like this. I think a lot of my code is in monospace font. Brush script MT is cursive. Nice. All right. Font fallbacks. Yep, we covered that. Let's go font style. We can do font style normal, italic, oblique. Oblique text is leaning. It's very similar to italic, but less supported. Okay, so just use italics. Font weight property specifies the weight of a font. You can do normal, bold. You can make it bolder. You can make it super bold. You can also do it with numbers. Normal and small camp. So font variant property specifies whether or not a text should be displayed in a small caps font. Okay, interesting, small caps. Let's try making our paragraph bold. So we'll go font weight, and we'll see all those numbers. 900 is like super bold. So what up, everybody? I guess that's really bold. It might be hard to see. Let's try contrasting it to one that's not bold and not bold. And let's actually, we'll give it a class of para2. Oh my gosh. Para2 dot para2, and we'll give it a font weight of 200. See what that looks like, and we'll also make the text size a bit bigger. Font size, my bad, font size. Font size, make 25 pixels. Yeah. Font size, 25 pixels. And I did something wrong. Yes, I don't have that there. All right. See what that looks like. What up, everybody? So that's bold, and then this is not bold. Still not that big of a difference. Maybe if it's black, it'll look. Let's try making that black instead of gray. Or not gray. Gosh darn it. Why is it blue? That's this style here, that's why. And now it's green. What the fudge? Oh, that's the border. Ah. There we go. Hey, now it's black. Now you can clearly tell that that's bolder than this. Okay. That was a tangent. All right, let's move on. Font size. So you can set the font size. I already showed that. Font Google. Okay, so there's a lot of fonts that aren't supported by default, so you have to go to like Google Fonts and find them. So like Google Fonts, and you can actually find these and use them in your code. So I'm gonna grab Roboto. I think this one's pretty popular, and I can embed it as an import. Oh my gosh, I can't see it. No. Darn it. Select. I want this one right here. Yes. Darn it. My face is in the way. Well, you can add an import to your CSS file and then use it. Maybe it will show that. Or you can set this link to it and set family to Triong or whatever, or Roboto. Let's actually, nah, let's skip that. Hopefully you guys get the point. Font pairings. Oh, it's font pairings. Font pairing rules. Here are some basic rules to create great font pairings. Complement. It is always safe to find font pairings that complement one another. Great font combination should harmonize without being too similar or too different. Use font superfamilies. Contrast is king. Choose only one boss. One font should be the boss. Establish this hierarchy for the fonts of your page. This can be achieved by varying the size, weight, and color. Very cool. Georgia and Verdana is a classic combination, so that's what that looks like. It looks pretty good. Helvetica and Gourmand is a nice combination as well. Popular Google font pairings, Merriweather and Open Sans. That's nice. Ubuntu and Laura. Looks good. Fat Face and Poppins. Not a huge fan of that one. Cinzel and Fauna 1. Hey, that looks kind of cool. Fahala 1 and Libre Baskerville. Alright, and Space Mono and Muli, Spectra and Rubik, Oswald and Notice Sans. A bunch of these look nice, so I would probably choose one from this website and just go with it if you're making a blog. Font shorthand. So you can just do font, 20 pixels, Arial, sans serif, font, italics, small caps, bold, 12 pixel, 30 pixel, Georgia serif. So that's cool. You can set, so it goes font size, then line height. So 12 pixels of font size, 30 pixels line height. So that's pretty cool. That's a big line height, but it looks all right. CSS icons is up next. How to add icons. The simplest way to add an icon to your HTML page is with an icon line, such as Font Awesome. Yes, so icons are, you have to add a library as Font Awesome. So Font Awesome, you just look up and then you add their CDN. Start for free. Where's their CDN? Docs. Getting started. Let's see here. Set up as a kit. Set up a kit. Oh, great. Is there a Font Awesome CDN? Let's look that up. Font Awesome CDN link. CDN.js. All right, so here's one, I guess. I can copy this and then put it into here as a link, I think. Not really sure if it's a link or if it's a script. We'll try it. Actually, yeah, it's a CSS file, so I think that's okay. And let's try adding one of these icons. So CSS icons. So here they added this font awesome kit.js. Oh, maybe I should add this one. Would that work? Might work. Let's try it. Let's add this in. So instead of this, we'll add that. Save it. We'll add some of these icons and see if it shows up. I don't know if this will work or not, just because it's, you know, my web page instead of theirs. Let's see here. They're not showing up. Darn it, man. I had high hopes for that. Darn. Oh well, what it should look like is this. Hey, they have icons show up. Nice. Okay. Should look like that. Whatever, I guess. Bootstrap icons. So Bootstrap has some icons, I guess. You just do glyphcon cloud, remove user envelope thumbs up, and they look like that. This one actually should work. I would be shocked if this one didn't work. Let's try just copying all this and pasting it on mine. This should work. Let's see. Hey, there we go. There's our little icons. So you can use Font Awesome or Bootstrap. Yeah, Bootstrap. You can also use material icons, so from Google. That's another way to do it. All right, CSS links. So here we have links. You can basically make them look like a button. A link, a visited, a hover, a active, they're all different. So like, you know how when you click on a Google link, then the next time you look at it, it'll be purple. So like if I actually look up W3schools CSS, see how it's purple? It's because I visited it already. So you can actually change the colors of that on your own website with these properties. So visited, hover, like if you hover over it, it'll be different color. Or if it's active, so when it's being clicked, it's different color as well. And I can try that here. And hover, click, and then when I come back to it, then it's green because it's visited. So that's what that does. Text decoration, so none are underlined. You can also do all that stuff. Link buttons, basically just add some padding to it. And text decoration none, and display inline block, and now it's a button. Hey, would you look at that? All right, CSS lists. Oh gosh, cursor, style cursor. Oh yeah, you can add different cursors. So crosshair, you know, default, the pointer, whatever you want. This is what they look like. So crosshair, default, resize, help, move, resize, a bunch of points, progress, and text, weight, yeah, a bunch of different ones. Pretty useful. CSS list. So here's a bunch of lists, and you can style them. List style type circle, square, upper Roman, lower alpha. Okay, cool. Image as the list item marker. You can also use an image for that. Okay, so they use like a little purple square. All right, now we're on CSS tables. We have this table right here. If we want to make it, this is what it looks like. We have the nth child even, background color of gray, and then when we hover over it, it will make a different gray. So that's kind of cool. We have some padding, and then to make it green, we have the customer TH, so that's the table heading. And we make that background color this right here, which is RGB. So right here, AA, that's a high representation for green, so it makes it green. All right, so table borders, we can just do border 1 pixel solid. It will make something like that. We can make the width bigger for a row or for the table. We can collapse table borders. We can get rid of borders, I guess. Yeah, border collapse would be no borders. Border 1 pixel solid, yeah. Okay, next. Table size. We have width and height properties on the table and on the heading. So here, height of 70 on the heading. Width of 50%, so now it's taking up 50% of the screen. We can do table alignment, text align center, so all the cells are centered. We can do text align left, which is default, and vertical align bottom if we want the text to be on the bottom of each cell. We can do table style, so here we just add padding. I always use padding on tables for sure, unless you really need to condense data. Horizontal dividers, that's done with just a border bottom. That looks pretty nice. Hover, so when we hover over a row, then it changes background color. That's also pretty cool to do. Stripe tables, that's done with the tr colon nth child even or odd, and then you change the background color for those ones. Table color for the header, that's where you change the th part of it. Table responsive, here a responsive table will display a horizontal scroll bar if the screen is too small to display the full content. So if we try this and this is too small, then it shows a horizontal scroll bar so that we can see the full table. That's cool. And there's all the CSS table properties. CSS display. So the display property is the most important CSS property for controlling layout, and that's for certain because you can do display flex or display grid, and those provide a lot of control for your elements. Right here, the default display value for most elements is block or inline. I think in the HTML, there is a bunch of elements that are block level elements. Yeah, right here, these ones are block level elements, and they'll take up the full space of the screen. And inline elements will only take up as much space as the content within it. So if you have a like hello world, then it will just take up that space of hello world, whereas a block level element will, extend all the way out. Display none if you want to basically hide it, to hide and show elements without deleting and recreating them. You can do display block on the inline elements if you really want to. So hide an element, so visibility hidden, it's still there, it's just hidden. Display none, it actually like removes it from the page, but you can still, actually you probably wouldn't be able to find it in your inspection, but there's a way to like toggle it. More examples. Next, max width. Using width, max width, and margin, setting the width of a block level element will prevent it from stretching out the edges of its container. Using max width instead will improve the browser's handling for small windows. This is important when making a site usable on small devices. Yeah, so max width I think is a lot more usable than width. Width is very static. Max width at least can help with responsive layout designs. So here we have, go back. I want to try this one. Or no, not this one. Yeah. Width versus max width. So width will stay the same for this top one, and it extends off the page, which you don't want. So on a smaller screen size, this one will actually get smaller, which is nice. Next, CSS position. There are 5 different position values: static, relative, fixed, absolute, and sticky. HTML elements are positioned static by default. They're not affected by top, bottom, left, and right properties. It is not positioned in any special way. It is always positioned according to the normal flow of the page. So everything's static by default. Relative is positioned relative to its normal position. So you set position relative on a thing like this. Wherever it is in the flow, you can change where it is by some amount by stating like left or right or top or bottom. Don't really use relative too much. There are some cases where you do use it. Position fixed. It's positioned relative to the viewport, which means it always stays in the same place even if the page is scrolled. So this one is like if you have a sticky image. This one is fixed, this bottom div. Oh my gosh, can't even see that. Position absolute. It's position relative to the nearest positioned ancestor. However, if an absolute positioned element has no position ancestors, it uses document body and moves along with page scrolling. Here's an example. So you can basically put stuff on top of other content with absolute positioning. Position sticky is positioned based on the user's scroll position. A sticky element toggles between relative and fixed depending on the scroll position. So this is where you can get sticky navigation bars. So right here, there's some content above it, but then when we start scrolling down, it sticks to the top. You rarely use sticky, but again, just like a few cases where you'd want to use that. Positioning text in the image. So centered. You can just do position absolute for that. And then top width 50%, or top of 50%, width of 100%, text line center. And there we go. There's the centered content. Positioning is pretty hard for making cool designs, but if you understand enough of it, you can just try stuff out until it works. The Z-index property specifies the stack order of an element. So when you use position absolute, if you want it to be on top, then you make the Z-index really high. If you want it to be on the bottom, then you make it negative, I guess, like this. And then the image will go below the text. So that's kind of cool. Another Z-index example. Here we have Z-index 1, 2, and 3. So we should expect the gray box to be on top. And if we look at it, the gray box is on top of the green box, and the green box is on top of the black box, which makes sense. So it goes 1, 2, 3 on top. Without Z-index, the element defined last in the HTML code will be shown on top. So the green box will be on top then. Yep, there we go. So that's what Z-index does. CSS Overflow controls what happens to content that is too big to fit into an area. So Overflow property specifies whether to clip the content or to add scroll bars when the content of an element is too big to fit in a specified area. We have visible, which is default. Hidden, the overflow is clipped. Scroll, the overflow is clipped, and the scroll bar is added to see the rest of the content. Auto is similar to scroll, but it adds scroll bars only when necessary. The overflow property only works for block elements with a specified height. That's a good thing to note. So here, overflow visible. I think that's default. With a hidden value, it just gets cut off. Overflow scroll, it takes your box and then adds a scroll bar so you can still see everything. We'll use overflow scroll sometimes. It's not that big of a deal. Auto kind of does the same thing, except it's only needed when when it has to, and then you can also set it for Y or X. So X would be horizontal. You can set overflow X for horizontal scrolling. That's if you have a big long box that goes off the screen. You can set that overflow X and it'll add a scroll bar there, so you don't have to, scroll all the way on the main page. All right, CSS float. Float doesn't really get used too much anymore. I think we go with flex, but I guess it's still good to know. The float property specifies how an element should float. CSS clear property specifies what elements can float besides cleared element and on what side. Float property is used for positioning and formatting content. Let an image float left to text in a container. We have float left, right, none, and inherit. The float property can be used to wrap text around images. Okay, so image float right, and then the text goes around it. All right, interesting. No float, it looks like that, which looks like dog, dog water. Example, float next to each other. Okay, whatever. I don't care about this stuff. When we use the float property and we want the next element below, we will have to use the clear property. The clear property specifies what should happen with the element that is next to a floating element. So div2 clear left with clear fix does this. Without, then the box will go over it, I guess. You can also do overflow auto on that. Okay, whatever, I don't care. Float examples equals boxes, float left. Here we're getting a box, so all these get float left, width of 33%. Okay. And then the main one has a clear fix. Yeah, not exactly sure what's going on there. I would just avoid clear and float altogether. No need to use it. Okay, please don't use it. I'm just going to skip this. CSS inline-block. Compared to display inline, the major difference is that display inline-block allows you to set a width and height on the element. Oh, okay. The top and bottom margin paddings are respected, but display inline they are not. The major difference is that inline-block does not add a line break after the element, so the element can sit next to other elements. Right, exactly. All right, cool. Using inline-block to create navigation links. Display list items horizontally instead of vertically. The following example creates horizontal navigation links. So you can do display inline block, give it a font size and padding, and then they'll be right next to each other because they are inline then. Is it because anchor tags are normally block? If this was block, then it would be up and down, right? Yeah. But inline block, it uses as much space as it needs, and it will go horizontal. Okay. CSS align. Center align elements. So we can do margin auto to center it. Center align text, so text align center. Center an image. You can do margin left auto, margin right auto with a 40%, I guess. Left and right align using position. So if you have position absolute, then you can set your right to 0 pixels and then it will be aligned on the right. Using float, you can just do float right, clear fix hacks, centered vertically using padding. So you can just add some padding to the Y, and then it will be centered because it's going to be 35 on each side, or actually 70 on each side. To center both vertically and horizontally, use padding and text line center, or you can just do padding 70 and padding 30 pixels. But I guess you could also do text line center, that's fine. Especially if you have a set width on this box. Centered vertically using line height of 200, text line center, that works as well, because I guess line height applies to both top and bottom. Center vertically using position and transform. Position absolute, you can do top left 50%, and then transform translate -50%, -50%. You see this answer on Stack Overflow sometimes. To me, it's kind of overkill. Using Flexbox, so this is what I would use. Display flex and then justify content center, align item center, and that will justify content center will do it horizontally, and then align items will center it vertically. Unless you have display flex and then flex direction of vertical or something. Geez, how did I forget? Oh well. CSS combinators. CSS selector contain more than one simple selector. Here we have child selector, we have adjacent sibling selector, and a general sibling selector. Child selector, so we want the child P elements of this div. The following example selects all P elements that are children of a div element, and we set their background color to yellow. Adjacent sibling selector, so if we have a P element that are placed immediately after div elements, select those ones. And general sibling selector selects all elements that are next siblings of a specified element. The following example selects all P elements that are next siblings of div elements. All right, let's move on. You don't really use those much, but I guess you can sometimes. Selector pseudo-class. A pseudo-class is used to define a special state of an element. So a pseudo-class is like hover or active. So in this case, we have, for links, we can do link, visited, hover, and active. HTML classes, a lot of times we like to use hover effects. So this is where we would hover over something and it changes color, like this button right here. They definitely have a hover effect on that. Also an active effect on it. No, they don't. No active effect on it. The first class, pseudo-class, match the first P element. So you can do first child of P element. Match the first I element in all P elements. So PI first child. Don't really use these much. Match all I elements in all first child P elements. The lang pseudo-class. Lang pseudo-class allows you to define special rules for different languages. In the example below, lang defines quotation marks for Q elements with lang no. So what is lang no? It's not French, it's not. Okay, I don't even know what lang no is. But I guess quotes over there are with tildes. Okay. Interesting. And here's a bunch of pseudo classes. We have active checked, disabled, so with checkboxes, that's helpful. Disabled, empty, enabled, first child, focus, hover, in range, invalid, all these guys. Root, target, valid, visited, and then all CSS pseudo elements after, before, first letter, first line, selection. And a little bit of description about each of them. CSS pseudo elements. A pseudo element is used to style specified parts of an element. For example, it can be used to style the first letter or line of an element, insert content before or after the content of an element. First line pseudo element. So first line here is used to add a special style to the first line of a text. Okay, so if we check here, first line is all caps, and it's also red. Okay, first letter, so I guess first letter we're making extra large. We can do first letter here, multiple pseudo elements, first letter, and then first line. Before, so the before one can be used to insert some content before the content of an element. So before this we're adding smiley faces. After would be after, I'm guessing. Yep, there's smiley faces after. Marker selects the markers of list items. So we're grabbing the markers and we're making them red. That's cool to know. Selection matches the portion of an element that is selected by a user. So is that like if I hover over it? Oh, so you can change your highlight color with that one. Selection, red and yellow. It's pretty cool if you really want to customize your website. And here's a bunch of all of them. These ones we saw before. CSS opacity, property that specifies the opacity, transparency of an element. Can take a value from 0 to 1, lower value, more transparent. I think we covered this already. Transparent boxes, we did this with the colors. So this is when you would want to use it if you want to show an image below it. You can do it like that. Set some opacity on the upper box. And let's move on. Navigation bars. So navigation bar needs standard HTML as a base. In our examples, we would build the navigation bar from a standard HTML list. It's basically a list of links, so using the UL and LI elements make perfect sense. And then make sure you use the A tag in your links. Don't use button. Because the one thing that links do is when you hover over them, down in the bottom left, there's like a URL that pops up. That's how you know it's a link and not a button. So yeah, there's some, we can do a vertical nav bar like so, just have it display block because it will take up as much space as it needs. Or you can do the horizontal nav bars, or you can do display inline, and then they'll show up right next to each other for list items. You can also float left. I wouldn't do it this way anymore. I would use Flexbox, but they like to do it this way, I guess. Make sure your list style type is none so that there's no like underlines or anything. And let's go on here. They just have a bunch of nav bars. If you want to explore this, you can. CSS drop downs. So here's a drop down menu that's customized. So on a drop down, class drop down, I guess they're not even using the drop down input. They're instead just using a hover effect where it shows it if you hover. Okay, interesting. Drop down menu. So drop down content. We are doing, when we hover over drop down, which is drop button. What does drop button have? Cursor pointer, padding, drop down, position relative, inline block, drop down content displays none starting out, and then it's display block when you hover over it. Okay. I would not do it this way, but you can if you want. Right align drop down content. Yep. All right. CSS image gallery. CSS can be used to create an image gallery like so. This can just be done with some float property. Again, I would use CSS Flexbox for this stuff. CSS image sprites. Here we can set width and height and then the background of it. And then we'll have these little sprites of the image. All right, cool. Attribute selectors. So here we have our attribute selector. It's going to be like, so every anchor tag with target equaling blank should have a background color of yellow. Or we can do title of flower. Or we can do class of top as background color yellow. Or what is this one? Is used to select elements with the specified whose value starts with the specified value. So every class that starts with top will be background yellow. Whose value ends with the specified value. So every class that ends with test will be yellow. This one is contained, so every class that contains TE will be background yellow. Styling forms. So this is usually when you would use it for your input. If it's type of text, then you make a different styling. Or if it's a button, then you make a different styling. That's mostly when you would use it. All right, next. CSS forms. So here's a nice looking form. Use the width property to determine the width of the input field. So width 100%, make it full screen. Input type text, type password to select them. Use the padding property to add space inside the text field, so that makes it look a lot better right off the bat. You can add margin so that there's space in between them. Bordered inputs, you can add a border to it, like so. You can add a border bottom property, so that's just on the bottom. That also looks pretty cool. Although normally I would go with this one so that people clearly know that it's in an input. Colored inputs, you can have it colored like so. Make sure there's a lot of contrast. Focused inputs, so you can change when it's focused, then have the background color be light blue, or have the border be nice and black when you are inside of it. So that's what focus does. It's when you're focused inside of it, then it changes styling. Input with icon image. Here you can add a background image of URL search icon, and that will put it inside of there. And just make sure it's not repeating. Animated search input. So here we click into it and then it lengthens out. And this way we do transition width. So the width property will, in 0.4 seconds, get bigger on focus. Cool. Styling text areas. Basically the same thing, I think, except with the text area input. That's also pretty cool. Styling select menus. So on selects, this one has a border of none, and it has padding and width 100%, pretty standard. Button, you can add some padding and background color, make it 100% width, that works. Margin at 4 pixels. Responsive form, so if we resize the browser on this guy, what happens? It will put the labels on top. That's pretty useful for smaller screen sizes. CSS counters. Here we have CSS counters. Never used these before. Counter reset section, counter increment section, content section counter. Huh, interesting. So I guess with each section, each H2 before, we're adding a counter increment of section and then the number. Oh yeah, the content is section and then counter, which is a function in CSS. And then you add section. Interesting, to say the least. I have never used that before. Nesting counters, you can nest them. You can put them on lists. All right. Website layout. So here would be a pretty cool website layout. There's ways to do it. Navigation bar. You can do it with float, I guess. I wouldn't, but can. One column is often used for mobile browsers. 2 columns is used for tablets and laptops, and 3 columns is used for desktops. Like so, unequal columns, you can do that. Setting different widths to them. Footer, make sure it's on the bottom. Just put it after everything else. That seems to work fine. Next, CSS units. You can use pixels or you can use M. You can also use rem. Any CSS properties take length values such as width, margin, padding, font size. I like to use pixels, but I know a lot of people actually use M or rem. Absolute lengths. I guess you can even use centimeters and millimeters. Huh. That is interesting. You use points, picas, relative lengths. You can use M relative to the font size of the elements. 2M means 2 times the size of the current font. Rem relative to font size of the root element. So root M. So M and your root M. I know a lot of people that like to use those. Normally 1em is going to be like 16 pixels. Next, CSS specificity. Ugh. If there are two or more CSS rules that point to the same element, the selector with the highest specificity value will win. Style declaration will be applied to that HTML element. So here we have color red. Also we have color green and color red on the P. So the one that's specific is the class. So that one's going to be applied. So this text is going to be green. And it sure is. Nice. Example 3. Here we have an ID of demo. And IDs are more specific than classes. So it's going to be blue. And there we go. So just keep that in the back of your mind. What takes precedence over which. Oh, and then style is more specific than any of these, so style would take effect. How to calculate specificity. I guess this is the table for it. This is the least specific, which is everything. That makes sense. Consider these 3 code fragments. Specificity of A is 1, and then 101, then 1000. Okay, so I think you guys get the gist there. CSS important. It will override all previous styling rules for that specific property on that element. So if it's important, then it will for sure be applied no matter what. Like so. This P has my ID on it, so you would think it would be blue, but since this one has important on it, it becomes red, and with all the other ones as well, because it's selecting all the P's. Math functions. Important about important. The only way to override an important rule is to include another important rule on a declaration with the same or higher specific in the source code. Okay, cool. Maybe 1 or 2 fair uses. Another way is assume you want a special look for all buttons on a page. Here buttons are styled with a gray background color, white text, and some padding and border. The look of a button can sometimes change if we put it inside another element. To force all buttons to have the same look, we put important on it. I see. Makes sense. CSS math functions. We have the calc function, which performs a calculation to be used as the property value. A lot of times we'll do that with like percentages and pixels like so. So calculate 100% minus 100 pixels, and then that will be the width. We can use the max function, uses the largest value from a comma separated list of values. You can use, okay, so whatever is bigger, 50% or 300 pixels, use that. You can also use min, so whatever is smaller out of those. So that's a good way to mix percentages and pixels. CSS rounded corners. With the CSS border radius property, you can give any element rounded corners. This one's pretty easy. Just do border radius 25 pixels. That will be all the way around. There's also like border top left, top right, bottom left. Or you can use the shorthand one, which is like this. So it'll go, what, top right first? I think. Applies to the top left first, okay. So top left, then on the right, then on the bottom right, then bottom left. You can also use elliptical corners. Border radius 15 pixels minus or divided by 50 pixels. What does that look like? Ew, it's kind of ugly, honestly. Never do that, please. Alright, let's move on. CSS border images. So you can also use images for the border. Yeah, I wouldn't do that either unless you really want to be creative. Border image. Cool, alright. So that's good to know. You can do that. CSS background. Yep, you can add background, image, position, repeat, no repeat. This is the shorthand property. So you start with the URL. You can say right bottom, no repeat. And you can add another one and left top repeat. And that's what that looks like. Pretty cool. CSS background size. You can have it cover or just have 100 pixels, 80 pixels. You can do contain or cover. Usually we would do cover, and cover looks pretty decent. Of course, they're doing it inside boxes. Define sizes of multiple background images. That's done with commas. Full size, just do cover. Center fixed. No repeat center. Position relative for this one. Create a hero image, a large image with text. Background origin property. Here we do content box, which is the image starts from the upper left corner of the content. CSS background clip property specifies the painting area of the background, whatever that means. All right, let's move on. CSS colors. Didn't we already do this already? We did CSS colors already. I'm skipping this. CSS color keywords. Transparent, current color, and inherit. So that's good to specify. Transparent, it will be, completely see-through. Current color, whatever the current color is, I guess. It's like a variable that holds the current value of the color property of an element. This keyword can be useful if you want a specific color to be consistent in an element or a page. Oh, so the border will be 10 pixel solid current color, which is blue. Okay. Or you can use inherit, so whatever the parent one is, it will inherit that color. Pretty sure. Inherit from its parent element, yes. So it will be red, right? Span border inherit, so the inherits the border of 2 pixel solid red. So that's why there's lines in between these ones. All right, cool. CSS gradients. So we can make cool gradients like this. And that's done with linear gradients, or radial gradients, or conic gradients. Normally we just use linear gradients. You can do top to bottom or left to right. You can do to right, red to yellow. Top left, bottom right, linear gradient. So to bottom right, red, yellow. Using angles, you can do 180 degrees, red, yellow. You can add 3 colors, so red, yellow, green. You can do a rainbow. So to right, red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, violet. Using transparency, you can do RGB. So to right from completely transparent to completely opaque with red. Repeating, you can have repeating linear gradient like so. And then I guess you select how much width it takes. Radial gradients will be from the center. Normally we don't use these, so I won't spend a lot of time on them. Conic gradients, what are these? These guys are like so. I guess they go around in a circle. And we normally don't use these guys either. They're there if you need them. CSS shadows. So we can set shadows on boxes. These are really helpful for making cards on your page, highlighting images and stuff like that. And that's done with box shadow. With text shadow, normally we don't use that, but you can. That would look like that. Let's get to the box shadow stuff. Here, box shadow. So we go 10 pixel, 10 pixel. So that's saying we want 10 pixels to the right, 10 pixels down. And we want it to be black. Black is default. Or actually it's current text color, I guess. So that's good to know. Specify color. That's done with the next one, next property. And then you can set a blur on it. You can do that right here with the 5 pixels. So it's going across 10, down 10, and adding a blur of 5 pixels and light blue. And then you can do some radius spread radius of 12 pixels. So it'll spread an extra 12 pixels. Set the inset parameter. So I guess you can have it inset so it goes on top of the other box. Add multiple shadows. You can add multiple. See what that looks like. Like that, I guess. Hey, it's kind of neat. Cards, you can also use the box shadow property to create paper-like cards. Yes, like this. They look nice, and we do this quite a bit. Although we probably won't use these specific values. although it is nice to use opaque or see-through gray values, or see-through black as the shadow. All right, next. CSS text overflow, word wrap, line break, and rules and writing methods. Text overflow, word wrap, word break, writing mode. All right. Text overflow property specifies how overflowed content that is not displayed should be signaled to the users. It can be clipped. We can use an ellipse. So I actually used the ellipse one time for tables. Like if we have a long amount of text on a table, we kind of want to clip that. And then like if you click onto the row, then it will show the full thing, but until then it'll be clipped. The following example shows how you can display the overflowed content when hovering over an element. Overflow visible, CSS word wrapping. So if you set it to word wrap, then it will, do so. Allow long words to be able to be broken up. So if it's a long word, then we can break it up. CSS word breaking. Keep all or break all. Okay. CSS writing mode, we can do vertical, right, left. Geez, never used that before. Next, CSS web fonts, font face rule that are not installed on the user's computer. When you have found or bought the font you wish to use, just include the font file on your web server and it will automatically download to the user when needed. Your own fonts are defined within the CSS font face rule. So here's an example: font face, font family, my first font, and then it's source, and you have a URL to it. And I guess it's a .waf file. That's kind of funny. Normally I wouldn't get my fonts like this. I would get them from Google and just import them into my CSS. I guess you can also do it this way. 2D transforms. Here we can transform this and translate it. This is helpful for animations, but they aren't adding animations to these yet. Scale, like we can also, like when you hover over it, it will transform and scale bigger. Sometimes they do that with buttons. Scale X method will just scale horizontally. Scale Y, it'll scale vertically. Skew, it will along an x-axis by a given angle. Same with Y, that's both of them. Matrix combines all the 2D transform methods into one. Oh my goodness. Yikes. All right. So there's those. 3D transforms. We have rotate X, rotate Y, rotate Z. Good to know. CSS transitions. So this is when you would actually combine all these things with transitions. How to use a CSS transition. So here we have transition of width, 2 seconds. So let's try it. And when we hover over it, then it gets bigger over 2 seconds. So when we hover it over, it should be 300 pixels, but we have this transition on it saying it should take 2 seconds. Change several property values, so we can change the width and the height. Specify the speed curve of the transition. So we have ease, linear, ease in, ease out, cubic visor. Delay the transition effect, you can set a delay on it. You can add a transition effect. So transform 2 seconds. Specify like one of these. So you can also do it longhand like so. CSS animations. Allow animation of HTML elements without using JavaScript or Flash. Learn about keyframes, animation name, duration, delay, all this stuff. So with the keyframes rule, you can set from and to properties. So from red to yellow, and then we say has this keyframes example, and we give it a duration of 4 seconds. So it will change from red to yellow. Beautiful. We have this one, which has 4 properties. Goes from red, yellow, blue to green, and this one also takes 4 seconds. Oh yeah, pretty cool. We can change other properties like left and top. especially if the position is relative and it makes sense to use that. Delay an animation, we can delay it. We can also make it repeat, so animation iteration count. It'll repeat 3 times. We can also set that to infinite, so it'll continue forever. Like this one, it'll just go in a circle forever on your web page. Run animation in reverse direction. You can set it to reverse. What else? Make it run forwards first, then backwards, so that's alternate. Alternate reverse. Specify the speed curve of the animation, so linear ease in, ease out. So they go at different rates, but then they'll all end at the same time. That's what the difference is for those. Specify the fill mode for an animation. Fill mode forwards. Whatever that does, not exactly sure. I don't really want to read it. You also do backwards or both. Animation shorthand property, like so. Example, 5 seconds linear, 2 seconds infinite, alternate. Beautiful. And then make sure that hooks up to a keyframe. Next, CSS tooltips. So that's pretty cool. You can do tooltips, which are relative, inline-block, and you can set them when you hover. So visibility visible. So when you hover over it, it will be visible. And then we just make sure that it's relative. And the tooltip is position absolute. And it's on top. Normally I use libraries for this, like Bootstrap, so that I don't have to deal with all this complicated CSS. Because seriously, who wants to write this? Nobody. Example explained. They explain it, but it is helpful to know though. CSS style images, rounded images, so it just makes a border radius on that. Thumbnail image as a link. So just wrap it with an A tag and it will become a link. Add a box shadow to it when you hover. Responsive images. You want it to scale down if it has to, but never scale up to be larger than its original size. If you want that, then you want max width 100%, height of auto. Center an image. Here we're centering this guy by doing display block, margin, auto, width 50%. Polarized image cards, we're setting box shadows on them. We're setting an image inside to width 100%. And the container to be center, padding 10 pixels, 20 pixels. Transparent image. You can also set opacities on images. All right, image filters, grayscale. Oh, these are a bunch of the image filters. So we can do filter, grayscale, so it's only gray. You can do like blur. You can do a bunch of these things. There's so many. There's brightness, contrast, hue, rotate, invert, opacity, saturate, sepia, and those are all the effects of it. You can play around with that if you want. Image hover overlay, like so. So when you hover over it, it slides down. Let's see what that one looks like. When we hover over it, it transforms some text down. And yeah, kind of complicated, honestly. But it is cool. Can't deny that. Responsive image gallery. So when we change the screen size, it'll go from 1 column to 2 columns to 4. Image modal advanced. So this is more advanced. We can do a modal with some JavaScript. Try this, click on it, it becomes a modal and we can clear it. That's how you do that. It's cool. Image reflection. So we can do image reflection with box reflect. Good to know. Object fit. A lot of times with images you can do object fit contain so that it will keep its aspect ratio. That's actually a very useful property. Object fit cover. A lot of times we like to object fit contain. It keeps its aspect ratio, but it is resized to fit within the given dimension. So that one's very nice. Object fit fill, image resize to fill the given dimension. If necessary, the image will be stretched or squished to fit. Using object fit none, the image is not resized, so I'm guessing that is default. You can scale it down. Another example, and more examples with that. Object position is used to specify how an image or video should be positioned within its container. So this is Paris. Object fit cover to keep the aspect ratio, using object position property. Position the image so that the great old building is in the center. Oh, I see. So it's getting clipped a little bit, but we want the big building to be in the center, so we set its position to be a little bit off of what it was by default. CSS masking. You can mask a layer image like so. So here we have this PNG image and we put this image inside of it basically. And we do that with mask image URL, mask repeat, no repeat. So that's pretty cool. The original image is here, image 5 tear. Inside here, and we have our mask 1, which is this URL. I see. Okay. So you wrap a div with a mask, or you wrap an image with a mask, and it makes it look cool like that. I can see uses for that. I think it looks cool. Use gradients as the mask layer. You can also use gradients. That looks nice. Radial gradient examples. Shaped as a circle. That's kind of cool. Do it as an oval. You use an SVG, so it's a triangle. Use a star, some circles. CSS buttons. So here's a default button, and here's the CSS button. We can set border to none. Add some padding, add a background color, add some text decoration of none, display inline block. And that's some different colors. Looks good. You can add some different sizes, so just different font sizes. You add some different padding to them, some rounded buttons with border radius. You can give them different borders. You can make it so that on hover, then it will change to fully red. Sometimes, yeah, like this one. So that's kind of cool sometimes with the transition duration. Shadow button, you can add the shadows to them. Disabled, if they're disabled, then it will be kind of grayed out. Button width, you can add width to them, so 50%, 100% of the container. You can add float left, border button group, so that's done with floats, I guess. Display block, so that they're vertical. Button on image, that's done with some position property, position relative. And then you put the button inside of it. Class of button, position absolute, 50% top, 50% left, and then the button gets put in there. Animated buttons, so that's also kind of cool. Fade in, ripple effect button, that's really cool actually. Let's see what they did for that. Something complicated. I don't want to explain it. CSS pagination. Hey, look at that. We have some pages here. Display inline block. So they're links, and we just put them next to each other and add some padding to them. And then when they're active or hovered, then we change the look of them. Hoverable transition effect. Oh, that actually did something. So that's cool as well. Bordered pagination, just add borders to them. You can also add margins so that they're spaced apart. Pagination size with font size, center it. All right, let's move on. Multiple columns, like so. You can do column count, column gap, rule style, rule width, rule color, rule span width. Create multiple columns, column count 3, column gap 40 pixels, column rule style. I've never used this before. It seems kind of useful. CSS user interface, resize, outline offset. Oh my gosh, there's so much to go through with CSS, guys. I'm gonna do another video on this. I gotta take a break. This stuff is hurting my brain. All right. All right, let's keep making our way through the CSS. Oh, also in the background, we have Krusty's pancakes and some nice shelving now. So that's pretty cool. All right, so CSS user interface is resize, outline, offset. So resizing allows us to resize a div. So in this case, we can resize this on the corner. If we only want to resize it horizontally, we do resize horizontal. So I guess this would be useful for like code editors. Like say you have an online code editor, you want a spot like a code CodePen website, how they have different sections for HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, and you can resize them. So this would be what this would be used for. It's pretty cool. It's actually pretty useful, especially if you want to resize like scroll bars or images. Maybe you can resize images this way. Outline offset, property add space between an outline and an edge or border of an element. All right, yeah, I think we looked at that before. CSS variables. So the var function is used to insert the value of a CSS variable. So we have the traditional way, which is like this, or we have syntax of the var function, which is var function is used to insert the value of a CSS variable, var name, and then the value. How it works, CSS variables can have a global or local scope. Okay, so here we go. The root, so here we're instantiating two variables, blue and white, and then they have the value of their color. And then we can use them with var dash dash blue. It'll grab this color. And then that way, all we have to do is change this blue color here if we want a different kind of blue, and then it will change all the rest of them. Or if we want a different color white, we can just change that one value and it will change all the rest of them instead of having to go through each one and meticulously go through it. Advantages of using var are makes code easier to read. It makes it much easier to change the color values. Yes, for sure. Just need to change the two variable values and now they're softer, blue and white. Awesome. Overriding variables. This is pretty easy, I think. While local variables can be used only inside the selector where it is declared. Look at the example from the previous page. Sometimes we want the variables to change only in a specific section of the page. Assume we want a different color of blue for button elements, then we can redeclare the blue variable inside the button selector. When we use var blue inside the selector, it will use the local blue variable value declared here. Okay, so I see, so button, and then we use dash dash blue here, and now when we use var blue, it uses this value instead. All right, I don't really know if that's super useful, but could be. Add a new local variable. So here we're doing button blue for our variable, and we're using it here and here. I wonder if you can like use it in other buttons then, but nah, maybe not. Next, variables and JavaScript. CSS variables have access to the DOM, which means that you can change them with JavaScript. Now that's pretty interesting. Here is an example of how you can create a script to display and change the blue variable from the example used in the previous pages. For now, do not worry if you're not familiar with JavaScript. All right, so you select the root with query selector, and then you get computed style, and then you r.style.set property blue to light blue. All right, doesn't seem too difficult. It's pretty cool though. Next, variables and media queries. Here we first declare a new local variable named font size for the container class. We set its value to 25 pixels, then we use it in the container class further down. Then we create a media rule that says when the browser's width is 450 pixels or wider, change the font size variable value of the container class to 50 pixels. I see, so we use a media query, and then we change the container font size variable to 50 pixels. So dot container font size 25 pixels, and then when we go into the container, we use that font size. Unless it's bigger than 450, then we change it. I can find uses for that. It's pretty cool. Here's another example where we also change the value of the blue variable in the media query. So we change the root to light blue if it's bigger. Okay, awesome. CSS box sizing. So CSS box sizing property allows us to include the padding and border in an element's total width and height. By default, the width and height of an element is calculated like this: width plus padding plus border equals actual width of an element. The following illustration shows two div elements with the same specified width and height. This div is bigger. This div is smaller. Width is 300, height is 100. Width is 300, height is 100. The two div elements above end up with different sizes in the result because div 2 has a padding specified. Okay, yeah. The box sizing property solves this problem. With the CSS box sizing property, allows us to include the padding and border in an element's total width and height. If you set box sizing border box on an element, padding and border are included in the width and height. Okay, so this one we have padding of 50 pixels, box sizing border box, and it looks like that. I don't know if I would really use this at all. Maybe there are uses for it. Since the result of using the box sizing border box is so much better, many developers want all elements on the pages to work this way. I don't know about that. Oh, I guess you can if you you can do that using the all selector. Ensures that all elements are sized in this more intuitive way. Many browsers already use box sizing border box for many form elements, but not all, which is why inputs and text areas look different with 100%. Okay. Yeah, I guess it can be useful, especially if you don't use width and height much. Then it probably doesn't have that big of an effect. Next. CSS media queries. The media rule introduced in CSS2 made it possible to define different style rules for different media types. Examples, you could have one set of style rules for computer screens, one for printers, one for handheld devices, one for television type devices, and so on. Unfortunately, these media types never got a lot of support by devices other than the print media type. Okay. CSS3 introduced media queries. They extended the CS2 media types idea. Instead of looking for a type of device, they look at the capability of the device. Media queries can be used to check many things such as width and height of the viewport, width and height of the device, orientation, so is it landscape or portrait, and then resolution. Using media queries are a popular technique for delivering a tailored style sheet to desktops, laptops, tablets, mobile phones, such as iPhone and Android phones. Media query syntax. So media query consists of a media type and can contain one or more expressions which resolve to either true or false. Here we have a media query, and then we say not or only, and then the media type, and then the expression. Okay, the result of the query is true if the specified media type matches the type of device the document is being displayed on. All expressions in the media query are true. Okay. Media queries simple example. One way to use media queries is to have an alternate CSS section right inside your style sheet. So here we have media screen, and the minimum width of the device is 480 pixels. If that's true, then we want the body of the background color to be light green. So if the minimum width is 480, which I think it is right now, but when it goes smaller, then it should turn pink, yeah, because this isn't applied anymore. But if the minimum width is over 480, then it turns green. Okay, cool. That's awesome. So if they're all true, then it will do that. If the media screen and minute width is 480, so same as this, then we do these things. So CSS media queries are very useful. More examples. So here we have background color tan and then max width. So if the max width is 992, then we want the background color to be media screen and max width is 992. So if it's smaller than that, then it's blue. If it's smaller than 600, then it's olive. Okay. So min width is if it's greater, max width is if it's less. Okay, that's good to know. Media queries for menus, we can have it all on large screens, it will look like this. On small screens, then it will be stacked. Top nav A, float none with 100%. Media queries for columns, we can do 4 columns for large screens. So column of width 25% versus 50% and 100%. We can do display flex and then flex of 25%, 50%, and just no flex, just column. Hide elements with media queries. We can do display none on something if it's the screen size is 600 pixels wide or less, then we can hide it. Variable font size, we can make the font size bigger if it's on a bigger screen. Flexible image gallery, flexible website, orientation, portrait, landscape. So here we have screen and orientation is landscape, then the background color is light blue. But then I'm guessing if I had a phone, then it would turn light green instead. Min width or max, min width to max width. So here we have when the browser's width is between 600 and 900 pixels, change the appearance of a div element. So this is between them. Using an additional value, we use an additional media query to our already existing one using a comma. So we do this, and then, or it's above 1100 pixels. So this is how you do or. I guess you just add another one with a comma. It's good to know. CSS Flexbox. So CSS Flexbox is very useful. You will want to use this a lot. So pay attention to this one. Before the Flexbox layout module, there were 4 layout modes: block, inline, table, and positioned. Flexbox layout module makes it easier to design flexible, responsive layout structure without using float or positioning. To start using the Flexbox model, you need to first define a flex container. You do that with class flex container, which is display flex. You do it with display flex. All right, the flex container is display flex, and then you can start doing all these other things on it. We can do flex direction, flex wrap, flex flow, justify content, align items, and align content. So flex direction, we can do column, or we can just leave it as flex and it will be row. So if we say column, then it'll position like that. If we say column reverse, then it will be a column, except the items will be in reverse order. We can do row, we can explicitly state row, but that happens by default. We can do row reverse, so the items are just reversed. Flex wrap property, so that it will actually wrap around onto the next line if necessary. No wrap, so it will keep going and have a scroll bar if it needs to. Wrap reverse. Flex flow property is a shorthand property for setting both the flex direction and flex wrap properties. So here we do row and wrap. Justify content property, we can center it. We can do start so that it will be at the start. You can do flex end, so it'll be at the end. So start and then end. Center is in center. You can also do space around. This is kind of cool. You can space it around like this. Sometimes you'll want to do that just to make things look nicer. You can do space between. So the difference with this one is the edge ones go all the way to the edge instead of leaving a little bit of space there. Line items property, this is for centering them vertically. So this way we go center, so it'll center vertically. Flex start, it will go to the top. Flex end will be at the bottom. Stretch, it will fill the container. This is by default, I guess. It'll go like that. The baseline value aligns the flex items such as their baseline aligns. So different font size to demonstrate that the items get aligned by the text baseline. Okay, align content property is used to align the flex lines. Space between value displays the flex lines with equal space between them. Okay, yeah. Line content space between. Okay, so we're space between. I see, okay. Space around value displays flex lines with space before, between, and after them. Okay, yeah, so we're adding some space here and here. That's on the flex container, right? Yeah. That's only if it's wrapping. Okay. The stretch value stretches the flex lines to take up the remaining space. This is default. Awesome. Center value displays the flex lines in the middle of the container, so it'll center them. Nice. Flex start probably at the top, and then flex end at the bottom. Perfect centering. You can do display, flex, justify content center, align item center. I do this all the time. Display, flex, justify content center, align item center. You can do that on buttons. You can do that on like everything, and then we'll just center it. That's awesome. Next, CSS flex items. Direct child elements of flex container automatically becomes flexible. The elements above represent 4 blue flex items inside a gray flex container. Yep. Flex item order properties are, or flex item properties are order, flex grow, flex shrink, flex basis, flex align self. Order property specifies the order of a flex item. So we can do style order 3, 2, 4, 1, and then it will order them that way. Okay, cool. And I'm guessing it's just display flex, yes, and then you can just change the individual divs inside of there. Flex grow property. So here we're changing this last div to have flex grow of 8, so it takes up the most space. It will grow 8 times faster than the other flex items. Okay, so it will grow 8 times faster. Flex shrink specifies how much a flex item will shrink relative to the rest of the flex items. Here we go, flex shrink of 0. Do not let the third flex item shrink as much as the other elements. Flex basis property specifies the initial length of a flex item. Flex basis 200 pixels. So that's the initial length of it, and then it will grow a little bit maybe. The flex property is a shorthand property for the flex grow, flex shrink, and flex basis. We can do flex 0 on the grow, 0 on the shrink, 200 pixels on the basis. So it'll be the same thing as this. Okay. Align self property specifies the alignment of the selected item inside the flexible container. So here we're going to align self center just on the third one. And these ones are the default align like grow or something. I forgot already. Align the second flex item at the top of the container and third item at the bottom. You can do start and end. All right, cool. CSS flex responsive. Here we're using media queries. So if we get to be under 800 pixels, then we want to do flex direction column. That makes sense. Do that a lot. Also with flex wrap, you can do that. Flex 100% if it goes, so that's one column. Responsive image gallery using Flexbox. Responsive website, what is this one? Responsive image gallery. Okay, so it goes from 4 columns down to 2, down to 1. Okay, nice. Here we have a website using Flexbox. And it starts out like that, and then when we go down, it goes to 1 column. Okay. Good to know. CSS responsive and web design. So this is all responsive web design tutorials here, and then we get into CSS Grid, CSS Sass, CSS examples, CSS reference is. I think what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna do CSS Grid, since I think we did most of this stuff already, the responsive stuff with the media queries and Flexbox. I'm gonna do CSS Grid, and then I'm going to do the quiz, CSS quiz. So let's do the CSS grid because grid is pretty important to learn. So this is like Flex, except the container is display grid on it. So now look at this. We do display grid instead of display flex. So now we have a grid container. And then we do grid template columns. Auto is they're all the same length of columns. We can also like change the length of the columns so that this column is smaller than this column and whatever we want there. Display property, make sure it's grid or inline grid. So inline grid also works. I wonder what the difference is. Inline grid, to make it inline grid container, so it doesn't take up the full width. Okay, so it's inline and it doesn't take up the full width. Okay. Grid columns, the vertical lines of grid items are called columns. Grid rows, these are the rows. Grid gaps, we have gaps in there. So we can do a column gap property sets the gap between the columns. And row gap sets gap property between rows. Gap property is a shorthand, so you can do 50 pixels for row and 100 pixels for column gap. Gap property can also be used to set both the row gap and the column gap in one value, and that's just 50 pixels for everything. Grid lines, we have line 1, line 2, line 3, line 4. You can do grid column start 1, grid column end 3, so that's on item 1. So here we're saying item 1, we want to be starting at 1 and then ending at 3, and it will make it a little bit bigger like so. So that's kind of cool. And then item number 2 goes in the third column, and then it just kind of wraps around, and the third item goes then onto the second row. So you just be aware of that. Place a grid item at row line 1 and let it end on row line 3, so this one will be vertically bigger. Grid container, grid template columns property, so this is a very important one right here. Here we do auto, should have the same width. You can also do it like this, where it's 80 pixels, 200 pixels, auto, and 40 pixels, so that they're different sizes. Grid template rows property. So this is the same thing as the columns, except with rows. So if we want the first row to be smaller than the second, we just do 80 pixels and 200 pixels. Justify content property is used to align the whole grid inside the container. So here we go, justify content space evenly, and then all the items inside the grid get kind of shrunk down and centered, looks like. And space around will look like that. Space between, it'll be on the edges. We have justify content center, so they'll be centered. Start will be on the left, end will be on the right. Align content property is used to vertically align, so align content is vertical. Center, space evenly, space around. These are very similar to justify content, or justify content. Align content is very similar, except vertical. Grid item. So child elements, items. A grid container contains grid items. By default, the container has one grid item for each column in each row, but you can style the grid items so that they will span multiple columns and or rows. Grid column property defines on which columns to place an item. You define where the item will start and where the item will end. So you can do grid column 1 to 5, and it will look like so. Grid column 1 span 3. So start on column 1 and span 3 columns. So that does that. Okay, start on 1 and then go 3. Makes sense. We can do 5 and it will make it a lot bigger. Let's try that, and there we go. And then everything else gets pushed down or pushed across, however you want to think about it. Here we start on 2 and we span 3, so it'll be in the middle more. Oh, this one is grid column. Yes, okay. It'll be in the middle, yep. Grid row property defines on which row to place an item. So grid row 1 to 4. So same thing. Grid column, grid row. Yeah, grid column, grid row. It's kind of the same thing, except this one's vertically. Grid area property can be used as a shorthand property for grid row start, grid column start, grid row end, and grid column end property. So grid area, we go 1, start on row line 1 and column line 2. So row 1, column line 2, and then go to 5 on the row. So row 5 down here and column 6 over here. Okay, and we can also use span. So start on 2, 1, and then go across 2. No, go down 2 and across 3. Okay, cool. Naming grid items. You can also, this is how I would do it. We can name grid items with grid area. So here we have item 1. This grid area is called my area. And we can do grid template areas and just say this one takes up 5 columns, like so. And then you can do like more of them. Here, let's see if they show that. To define 2 rows, you just do another set of what are these called? Quotes. Another set of quotes. So this is the second row, and then you can name the different things like this: header, menu, main, right, footer, and then make it look like this, and then it will just put the the items in the right spot. So it's actually really cool. So we want header on the top, we want menu here, or main, or menu on the left, 2, main in the middle, right on the right, and then the footer kind of in the bottom right. I used that once. It's pretty awesome. Order of the items. So we can also do order this way, I guess. You can rearrange order for certain screen sizes using media queries. So if it's under 500 pixels, then do this stuff. Yeah, try deciphering that one. All right, so that's the CSS Grid. Now let's do the CSS quiz and let's see how I do. Let's start this. It's 25 questions. What does CSS stand for? Cascading style sheets. What is the correct HTML for referring to an external style sheet? We stay a link rel style sheet, type text CSS, href my style CSS. Where is an HTML document? Where in an HTML document is the correct place to refer to an external style sheet? In the head section. Which HTML tag is used to define an internal style sheet? That would be style. Which HTML attribute is used to define inline styles? That would be style equals. Yeah. What is the correct CSS syntax? Body, color, colon, black, semicolon. Yes. How do you insert a comment in a CSS file? That is done like so. Which property is used to change the background color? That would be background color. How do you add a background color for all H1 elements? You just select H1. Which CSS property is used to change the text color of an element? That would be color. Which CSS property controls the text size? That would be font size. What is the correct CSS syntax for making all the P elements bold? We want P font weight bold. Yes. All P elements bold, yes. How do you display hyperlinks without an underline? You do text decoration none. How do you make each word in a text start with a capital letter? You can do text transform capitalize. I think it's text transform. Which property is used to change the font of an element? Font family. How do you make the text bold? font weight bold. How do you display a border like this? Top 10 pixels, bottom 5 pixels, left 20 pixels, right 1 pixel. So top would be 10, then right is 1. Okay, so 10, 1, then the bottom is 5, and then left is 20. So it'd be that one. Yes. Which property is used to change the left margin of an element? Margin left. When using the padding property, are you allowed to use negative values? Oh, well, of course you are. How do you make a list that lists its items with squares? List style type, I believe. How do you select an element with ID demo, hashtag demo? How do you select elements with class name test.test? How do you select all P elements inside of a div element? Div P. Yeah, I think it's that one. How do you group selectors? Separate each selector with a plus sign, separate each selector with a comma. I believe you separate them with a comma. What is the default value of the position property? That would be, is it static or relative? I think it's static. Yeah. Oh, I got one wrong. Oh no. Which one was it? Oh, you can't use negative values on padding. Oh, darn. They have to be positive. Okay, so I thought you could. I guess not. All right. Awesome. So that was the quiz for CSS. It was kind of fun. That was CSS from W3schools. Hope you learned something. If you did, make sure to give the video a like. If you didn't, also give it a like. Make sure to leave a comment. I'll read all the comments. And yeah, thank you for watching and have a great day. Bye.